This is Matthew Kratters, Bitcoin University. Today I want to answer some more of your Bitcoin questions. I tackled a bunch of them in my last video, which was called Correcting Common Bitcoin Misconceptions. I'll put a link to this in the description notes below if you want to catch up and learn why Bitcoin is not a bubble, why Bitcoin doesn't need to be backed by anything, and also why Bitcoin is more like a protocol than a corporation or company. And so it's very unlikely that it's going to become outdated in the same way that, for example, Netflix made Blockbuster outdated. So I'll put a link to that. As soon as I posted that video, right on cue, I got this comment, which the commenter promptly deleted after I answered it. He wrote, "Bitcoin is non-tangible and disappears if there's no electricity. Its value is based on what someone is willing to pay for it. There's a sucker born every minute." My response, you know what else is non-tangible and disappears if there's no electricity? Your digital dollars, your Venmo, your Zelle, your Cash App, your YouTube, etc. And yet surely these things have some value. We do live in a digital age, and hopefully at this point people understand that there is such a thing as a digital asset. But for Bitcoin, if the electrical grid goes down where you are, you can simply take your Bitcoin in the form of 12 words stored in your brain and go anywhere in the world that has electricity. Try doing that with a briefcase full of cash or a briefcase full of gold. You won't make it across any border. Also try doing that with your digital dollars, access to which is highly permissioned and can be turned off at any time. So if you have to flee to another country, you may not be able to access your bank account. What happens if all the electrical grids go down all around the world? Your Bitcoin simply goes into hibernation and can be retrieved the moment that there's electricity anywhere in the world. Try doing that with your digital dollars stored at Bank of America when you've had to flee the country to find food, because if there's no electricity in your country, there's not going to be groceries either, and you better live on a farm at that point. The commenter went on to say, Bitcoin's value is based on what someone is willing to pay for it. Yes, that is true, but it's also true for an egg, a house, or a share of Apple stock. They're only worth what someone will pay you for them at a given point in time. And right now, the global market is valuing Bitcoin at a $2 trillion market cap, approximately. So maybe the market understands something that this internet troll has missed. The internet troll went on to say, there's a sucker born every minute. This is also true, and I think it's why people are willing to work 16-hour days for fiat money, which the government can and does print up for itself for free. So this is actually an argument in favor of Bitcoin rather than against Bitcoin. There's a sucker born every minute. It's why there are people like this commenter who are probably dumb enough to think that shiny yellow rocks make good money in a digital age. If you've been holding gold instead of Bitcoin for the past decade, who's the real sucker? If we take a look at the chart of gold versus Bitcoin, gold continues to implode versus Bitcoin. So this is hardly the competitor. If you're finding this video helpful so far, I just ask you to help to support this channel's mission. Click the subscribe button. That really does help the channel. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video. Share this video with a friend or family member, or maybe an office co-worker. Another question. So if I copy and paste that protocol, in other words, Bitcoin's code, and name it Bitcoinium, set scarcity exactly like for Bitcoin, does it mean I made my own digital gold? My response, it means that you made your own private money. That's like making your own private language. You'll be lucky if you can get even 2 or 3 people to use it. So yeah, not a threat to a global asset being used by people in every country on earth. You can copy paste Bitcoin's code. This is very important. You can copy paste Bitcoin's code, but you cannot copy paste Bitcoin's strong network effects or global brand. The commenter continued with his critique of Bitcoin. What's the cost and transaction time if I want to buy a coffee with it? As if we've never heard this question over the last 10 years. The commenter goes on to say, tulips were also priced higher and higher by the markets, and it turned out to be just a scam. People gave a ton of money for a plant like any other. Doesn't it sound familiar? My response, which I talked about in the previous video too, about Bitcoin being a bubble or not. The tulip bubble, this is my response here, the tulip bubble lasted about a year. Bitcoin has lasted 15 years. It keeps crashing, then roaring back to new all-time highs. That's not what the tulip chart looked like. Also, tulip bulbs rot. It's amazing I have to even point this out, while Bitcoin is a digital asset that does not degrade. For fast transactions, for buying coffee, for example, using Bitcoin, you can always use Lightning and a Lightning wallet, and the fees are mere pennies, and the transaction will be instantaneous. The next critique of Bitcoin comes from Javier, who says he's happy to politely debate me on why Bitcoin will fail, and his main point is that Bitcoin does not have a business moat. He asks me, do you know what that means? Happy to debate if you can. My response, happy to debate you. and I've certainly read my Warren Buffett over the years, so I do know what a business mode is. Bitcoin happens to be money. It's not a business, so this is a big difference. Bitcoin certainly does have a strong moat, even though it's not a corporation or business. By moat, Buffett always means like a competitive advantage. Bitcoin certainly does have a strong moat that includes very strong network effects, nodes, miners, wallet makers, exchanges, and a strong, instantly recognizable global brand. Bitcoin has had the largest market cap of all crypto for 15 years. That should tell you something about its moat and Lindy effects as well. The next question from a listener. The only question I have, Bitcoin equals X amount of US dollars. So how is the price of Bitcoin valued or priced if the value of the dollar goes to zero, the US goes bankrupt, or is no longer, the US dollar is no longer the reserve currency? My response, you can price Bitcoin in anything you want. You can price it in euros, in yen, in gold, in cattle, in houses, in eggs. It's like saying, will my gold still have value if the US dollar goes to zero? Or will my car still have value if the US dollar goes to zero? You can obviously quote any asset's price in any currency, and you can also value things in terms of barter. How many cows will you give me for your car, or how many apples will you give me for your eggs? And it's interesting because this is actually a question that the Fed, the Federal Reserve in the U.S., has pondered. And in 2022, they did a blog post buying eggs with Bitcoin, in which they showed Bitcoin priced in eggs, or in other words, the price in Bitcoin of a dozen eggs. And we can see that eggs, like everything else, just keep getting cheaper in terms of Bitcoin. If we look at the 10-year chart, eggs are basically free now in Bitcoin terms. Another related food item, Patricia says, please talk about how to buy an apple with Bitcoin. I take this as probably a challenge to demonstrate that you can't buy anything with Bitcoin, but in fact, you can go and buy fruits and vegetables with Bitcoin in Berlin, many other places, obviously in Costa Rica as well. You can buy fruit. You can also buy nice things like wine from Ben Justman over at Peony Lane, the winery in Colorado. I'll put a link to this in the description notes below. I've been talking about Ben's wines for many years now. And you can buy some good Colorado beef from Jason Rich of Rich Ranch. I'll put a link to that in the description notes below. If you want to buy something with Bitcoin, you can go to btcmap.org, and chances are you will find a vendor or a merchant who you can purchase something with using Bitcoin. Next question, can you please make a video about your thoughts on taking risks in your life? For me, it is obvious that if you want to move on to a next level, you have to take some risks. The higher the risk, the higher the possible reward. I'd be very grateful to hear your thoughts on it. According to Bitcoin, we all have an option to invest in Bitcoin or use 2x ETFs or MicroStrategy or something maybe even more radical. My response, I think it's exactly the opposite. You want to avoid taking big risks. You want to do things that have a high probability of working out without somehow damaging yourself or your finances in the process. And I go on to write, at this point, I think that Bitcoin is not risky at all and still some giant upside compared to terrible investments like real estate bonds and most stocks. I also advise avoid leverage. This kind of risk is not worth taking. Avoid the 2x ETFs, avoid the MicroStrategy levered ETFs as well. And I'll put a link in the description notes below to the video in which I talk about this. But this is a common mistake. The way Warren Buffett got rich was not taking giant risks. He actually did very conservative things. He was just smarter about pricing stocks than anyone else. So you have to look for market inefficiencies. Someone else wrote in, I'm hearing non-finance YouTubers mention Bitcoin and lamenting that they didn't buy Bitcoin at 16K, but they don't have $100K, $100,000 US dollars to drop on it now. The amount of misinformation still prevalent around Bitcoin is astounding. And so I thought it would make sense to reiterate here what Bitcoiners know, but what the world is gradually discovering, that you don't need to buy a whole Bitcoin. One Bitcoin is divisible into 100 million Satoshis or sats. Actually, sats are what how Bitcoin is denominated on chain rather than in terms of BTC. It's denominated in terms of sats. But either way, you can buy just $5 or any amount of Bitcoin. Good places to buy Bitcoin. You want to buy them from Bitcoin-only companies like Bull Bitcoin, which is available in Canada, France, Costa Rica, Cash App, River, Strike, Swan, Unchained. These are all great places, Bitcoin-only companies, to buy Bitcoin from. Final question. What do you think about splitting Bitcoin up into different wallets? I mean, create a lot of small wallets, 100K Satoshis each, for example, offline, and write seed phrases, private keys down on metal that's hard to destroy, and then hold in different places those different wallet keys instead of having one wallet or two or 3. My advice here, that's not a good idea. Just get one good hardware wallet like the Coldcard. The Blockstream Jade is also good, and hold most of your Bitcoin in one place. It's much easier to put all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket very carefully rather than spreading your Bitcoin all around the world, and then it's more difficult to keep track of whether your private keys or your seeds have been compromised. I also mentioned it's a good idea to aim for larger chunks of Bitcoin, like 1 million satoshis, when you withdraw from one of these places. So it's okay to buy just $5 worth of Bitcoin, but when you withdraw to a hardware wallet, you want to wait until you've built up at least 1 million satoshis, and this is to sort of future-proof your Bitcoin against higher on-chain transaction fees. If you want even more security, depending on your threat model, you can take a look at using multisig as well. But for most people, if you get a Coldcard, you link it to Sparrow Wallet, and you're all set to go. And you just protect your recovery seed, your 12 or 24 words. You protect that very closely. That's the better way of doing it, rather than spreading your Bitcoin out in tiny chunks and then having so many moving parts and so many different wallets to keep track of. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.